For those in the foyer, we are about to begin our 8 o'clock session. Very good. We will have a few additional announcements at the close of our session this morning. Do want to let people know about some special options that they have going forward beginning at 9 o'clock. But at this time, I want to introduce David Kenney. David is the preacher in Newcomerstown, Ohio. He is a graduate of Freed-Hardeman University, and he has been part of OWL from our very beginning and has been here every year, and always we appreciate having David and look forward to his presentation this morning.
Good morning. It's good to see each one of you. I want to express my appreciation to Greg and the congregation here for having these lectures, and always enjoy being back in Columbus and seeing each one of you. We don't look quite as young as we did when we first started doing these, but some of you are still faring pretty well, so that's good to see you. Thanks again for having us. The topic today is the dawn of discovery, and when I was looking through it, we have Greg and Peggy we have a combo event at Newcomerstown. We have a ladies' day and then a gospel meeting. And Peggy did our ladies' day and Greg did our gospel meeting. And we really enjoyed having the Tidwells with us. It was a great opportunity. But since we had him and he gave me my topic, I was really pushing him to try to help me figure out what in the world I'm supposed to talk about. And that's always a challenge because there's just so much that you can talk about. Today's topic is the dawn of discovery, a thought-provoking exploration into the power of ideas and shaping our understanding of culture, society, and faith. This session sets the tone for a day of insightful discussions and revelations. And I'm really looking forward to hearing these presentations. If you've never heard Justin Rogers before, then you're in for a treat, and I hope that you take advantage of that. I'm looking forward to hearing Brother Massey and different ones myself. So this is an excellent program, and hope that you can be here for as much of it as possible. Now, the lecture discusses grand concepts involving periods of time in very generalized terms. It's a very broad brush. And there might be points that you might say, I don't think I'd phrase it that way. I don't think I'd say it that way. Or maybe I'd emphasize this. And it is such a big topic. So hopefully, as we think about some of these things, they will be of value to you. I purposely minimize a bunch of psychological jargon, psychology, philosophy, and things like that. I don't have anything against that, but I don't know that that would necessarily be profitable for us. But I will mention a couple of things. And I want us to think about the idea of listening to God has designed this life with natural laws. And I really want you to focus on that, because that's really what I'm going to emphasize. That God has designed natural laws, and they are so precise, and they are so interrelated that scientists are, waking up to these natural laws and the implications of them. And that's something that's going to be interesting to watch because a lot of them are starting to say, you just can't explain. Naturalism does not explain everything that we are seeing. Naturalism is the idea that the universe has been here forever. It's always been here. Or you had the Big Bang, it came from a little speck and all that. But that's naturalism. And when they start looking at the precision of these natural laws, they're realizing that nature does not explain that. And so when you're looking at something related to nature, and nature can't explain it, and it's more complicated, then you start thinking about words like this one, transcendence. transcendence. Now, we have to be careful about that term. Now, transcendence is just talking about that which is above nature, outside of nature, higher than nature. And we might be tempted to see somebody say, oh, I believe in transcendence. And they may say, well, I believe in a higher power. They might even say they believe in God. But you really have to pay attention when you talk to people, exactly how are they using those terms, how are they defining them, and what do they mean? Because we do have scientists that will recognize transcendence. They might even say they believe in a higher power. They may even go so far as to say they believe in God and then say, but I don't believe it's the God of the Bible, or I don't believe it's a personal God. And that gets to be problematic, so you have to pay attention to that. Now, the idea of dawn of discovery is challenging to me because what can we discover? If you recall, we look at passages such as Ecclesiastes 1, verses 8 through 10. The preacher, the writer, says, all things are full of labor. Man cannot express it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. That which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which it may be said, see, this is new? It has already been in ancient times before us. Now, we might be tempted to say, well, we have all kinds of new things, like the computer, PowerPoint. I mean, we have all kinds of technology that's new. And yet we do, but there's still an element, there's still principles that are involved that are still not new. And so we talk about the dawn of discovery. What I want you to think about, I'm not going to necessarily emphasize the idea for Christians that there's something that you need to discover as much as it is there are people in the world that are lost. They're lost. They don't believe in God. They don't believe in the Bible. They don't have anything to do with it. They don't want to waste their time with it. They might even say, why should I even bother with it? Those are the ones that need to have the dawn of discovery. They're the ones that need to recognize that there is a God, the Bible is his word, and they need to pay attention to that. So that's what I want us to think about. A lot of times we think we're a little higher minded than we ought to. Sometimes scientists, they think that they know more than they really know. Sometimes we could even be that way. It's a common problem. Matter of fact, if you go back and you look in Genesis 3:5, you'll see the discussion there when Satan, the tempter, puts forth this proposition to Eve, right? For God knows that in the day that you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now that expression there, to be like God. We have people, they want to be God. Or they actually think that they're God. And we can see that. We see examples of that all over the place. And if you doubt that, just think about the idea that of the concepts of the two words gender and sex. And what we've been doing is when I was in New Philadelphia Elementary School, they would say, well, what sex are you? Of course, they didn't have to ask that. Not in elementary school back in the 1970s. I mean, that was sort of silly. But you would see that and we'd sort of snicker. We'd snicker at that. What do you mean? Well, the teachers got tired of, little boys snickering all the time. So they say, well, what gender are you? Well, what in the world's that? Well, they say it's the same thing as sex. I'm like, why don't you say that? But we've gotten to the point now, science has gotten to the point now where they think that they can treat those two concepts as mutually exclusive. You'll have a sex you're born with, but you have a gender you can choose. And they think that they can go and surgically make that happen for you. And they're pushing that very hard, and that's no secret to you. But the fact of the matter is, as a matter of fact, I saw a statement just the other day that says every cell in our body speaks to our gender and our sex. Every cell in our body does that. Now, think about that. I mean, forget about the whole politics of it for a moment, if you can. That's hard. But just think about that natural law. You see, scientists think that they can usurp what has traditionally been viewed as the domain of God. They think they can do that. Well, that's really no different than that conversation between Eve and Satan, is it? You'll be like God. We have people in our country that think that they're God, or they want to be. And so we need to be mindful of that. We have the rise of secularism and its antagonism to religion. And I read and listened to several lectures by a gentleman named Charles Taylor. I don't know if you know who that is or not, but he's a prominent philosopher. He's from Canada. He's, I think, Roman Catholic, which is interesting because of some of the views that he has. But he wrote what some people think is a seminal work called A Secular Age. Some of you may have heard of that. It's a really good book. I mean, I don't recommend everything about it, but he talks about how secularism came after the rise of Christianity, Catholicism, the Protestant Reformation, the Enlightenment, things like that. And he talks about how, we started out saying that, well, we're going to pursue knowledge. And they learned languages that had been forgotten for a long time. They actually went and learned Greek and Latin, and they started reading. The Bible became really interesting to them because they could actually get the Bible in their own hands again. They could actually read it for themselves again. But the other thing they did is they started thinking about, well, we can pursue knowledge without the Bible. And so they would do that, and that would go on. It didn't happen right away, but what ended up happening was they bought into the idea that they could use this scientific method and they could find truths, and then they would look at the religious landscape around them and they would find contradictions. And they would say, well, these contradictions, science is disproven. And what they did, though, is they looked at the entirety of religious thought, and they would find these discrepancies as they saw it, even superstitions, mythologies, and they would say, well, religion has nothing to offer. We don't really need it. We've already disproven all of it. And that attitude just kept on going and going and going until secularism actually has become antagonistic to Christianity. It's become antagonistic towards religion. And Taylor goes and he talks about that, and he does it very well, very dryly, if you know what I mean. But you follow that, and you can sort of see the progression of thought there. And it's interesting because one of the lectures, the last lecture of his that I watched, and there are several of them on YouTube, you can watch them, obviously for free. But one of them, he was talking about the place for religion in a secular age. And I thought, well, this ought to be interesting because, he says he's Catholic, and he's talking about the rise of secularism. And I'm like, how's he going to work that? Well, what he does, and this is simplistic how I'm going to explain it, and not because you can't understand it, but because I have a hard time explaining it to myself, much less an audience. But basically what he says is, well, what we have is a situation where there's value to religion. And so we should, as a society, we should try to harness the positive things of religion as long as it is beneficial to society. So it doesn't matter in his scheme, his design of the way he thinks society ought to be. It doesn't matter if you're a Buddhist. It doesn't matter if you're a Muslim. It doesn't matter if you're whatever brand of Christianity. It doesn't matter any of that. As long as what you're bringing to society is beneficial to human thought, to human development, to societal progress. If it does that, then it should be welcomed by the secularists, and it should be embraced by the secularists, and there should be no conflict with that. Well, that sort of sounds good until you really start thinking about it. Who's the one that determines what is valuable and what is not? And if you have a situation, which we do as Christians, where we serve an eternal God, and God authored a book, and the book has values and ethics in it that are contradictory to societal norms, to popular opinion, well, what are you going to do then? It's not going to endure that kind of thinking. They'll try it for a while, but it's a conflict. We get back to what Jesus said in Matthew 12:25, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself will not stand. That's a major conflict. And this is the way he sees it. I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm just saying that just will not work. That won't work. You see, we have this conflict between religion and science, and it's unfortunate that we do, and we have to work through that better. We sort of set ourselves up for that. And it's still going on. I like to talk to young people. I like to teach young people. I don't have a lot of opportunities to do that, but I always like doing that. And one of the things, as I invariably teach and talk to them about, is I ask them this question. Scientific method, I ask them, what is a scientific method? Have you ever heard of it before? You know what? They have. I have never had a young person tell me, I have no idea what that is. And not only that, they can explain it. I'm like, wow, you got to be kidding me. They understand what it is, what it's about, what it's for, and all that. Then I ask them this question. Okay, who developed the scientific method? Silence. I have yet to have a young person be able to tell me who formalized the scientific method. That little detail, or they might know the name when I mention it, but they don't know much about the person who did, who's credited with that. That is Sir Francis Bacon. Sir Francis Bacon. Now, Sir Francis Bacon is sort of interesting because he is what they would call a theist. He's a believer in Christianity. And I asked young people this, and I'm asking you this, how can you take the scientific method of which people who do not believe in God, and they'll say, we can prove that God doesn't exist, or it doesn't really matter, and we use a tool that was developed by someone who believed in God, believed in the Bible, believed in these things. You see, and I would ask them that. And I'd say, do you think that that makes any sense? And they'd stop and think about that for a while. And you know what? We need to have more people stop and think. Bacon made this statement at one point. He said, God never wrought miracle to convince atheism because his ordinary works convince it. It is true that a little philosophy inclineth a man to atheism, but depth in philosophy bringeth men's minds about to religion. Doesn't sound like an atheist, does it? But people have been using the scientific method improperly through projection, extrapolation, things that would violate proper science to bring about conclusions that are not justified. Whoa, David, what are you talking about? Well, I just told you, right? We have these natural laws that are so fine-tuned that the naturalists cannot explain it. They keep pushing against these things, these natural laws, and they're intertwined. And they're like, this is, these laws, they remain. And then, you hope that they would think where there are laws, there is a lawgiver. I mean, that's the implication of that, right? But I sort of wonder how many of them really have been challenged. And I don't mean ugly. I mean, just have they even thought about, and I think some of them are, when you start hearing these concepts of things like transcendence, which is basically what they cannot explain by natural law. They can't explain it by natural means. It's beyond explanation. And we know what that is. The scientific method is not anti-religion. And we always need to remember that, I'm not a philosopher. I'm not one. But I also know that a lot of those guys are really smart, and ladies. They're really smart. They're really intelligent. But I always remember this statement: beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Christ. That is Colossians 2, verse 8. Be very careful about allowing someone that you think is smarter than you, maybe they have a 5-syllable vocabulary. These things are not difficult to understand, but they may dress them up to make them sound a lot more difficult than they are. What is the source for natural law? Now, in October 25th, my wife and I, we were in Athens, Greece. And we were standing there at the Parthenon, which was just, you hear about it, you read about it, you see, you're there. It's just incredible. And then you see this outcropping of rocks that they call Mars Hill, or Ares Hill. And you remember, the Apostle Paul was there. But why was he there? Well, he was preaching. But who is he preaching to? He wasn't preaching to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. No, he's in a different world. He is preaching to the philosophers. You see, in the ancient world, the philosophers, in the Greco-Roman civilization, it was the philosophers that talked about ethics and morality. That was really their world to talk about. And that's who he's talking about. And when I was walking, and I got to tell you, that outcropping of stones, it's got to be the slickest surface I've ever tried to walk on. Some of you ever been there, you know what I'm talking about. It is extremely slick. And they tell us, now, don't look, watch where you're stepping. Don't look. And I'm like, well, how can I do that? There's the Parthenon, there's this, there's Athens. I'm like, I'm wanting to look around. They said, don't do that. If you do, stand still, because it's extremely slick. But I was thinking about these statements that Paul made. And I was thinking about this one in particular, because I was thinking about, what am I going to talk about here today? And this passage came to mind. Acts 17, 25 through 28, Paul makes a statement. He says, he gives, referring to God, or to the unknown God, he gives to all life, breath, and all things, and he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as also some of your own poets have said, for we are his offspring. I was thinking about a couple of phrases out of there. And here they are that I was thinking about. Pre-appointed times. You ever thought about what that means? Or this one, the boundaries of their dwellings. What is he talking about? You ever thought about that? He's not talking about a house. He's not talking about a physical structure. He's talking about something more grand than that. It's interesting that he talks about these things, and he tells them that, these things are going to make it so, and he said it so that we should seek the Lord. So these things are going to point to God. And he said that even your own poets have said this, which is a fascinating statement. It really is. Why? Well, one of the first times I was here on the OWL lectureship, I was talking about Hippocrates, and my subject was abortion. And I made the comment that the Hippocratic Oath, written by Hippocrates, is very explicit about a doctor not performing an abortion. It's extremely explicit on that subject. Well, they've revised the Hippocratic Oath. They've changed it. And I made the observation about that, and I read what the phrase was about, and I'm not going to mess with that so much, but I can remember somebody, and this was a good conversation. It might have been one of you, I don't remember. And it was a pleasant conversation. But I remember I said, maybe we should go back to the Hippocratic Oath the way Hippocrates wrote it. And somebody afterwards had said, I don't know if you want to do that. And I'm like, what do you mean? Well, Hippocrates was a pagan. He worshiped Apollo and these false gods and goddesses of medicine and all that. I don't think you would want to advocate a Hippocratic Oath, which includes tribute to these false deities, which it does. It was a little off my point, but he was right. But I made this observation to the person. I said, that's true, but I want you to remember this point, and this is why I bring it up. Even a pagan in the Greco-Roman era recognized transcendence. He had the wrong deities, but he recognized that there was something beyond naturalism, that there was this transcendence phenomena. And that's why Paul was there, wasn't it? I see you're superstitious, you have all these idols, and I found this one inscription to the unknown God. That's the one I proclaim to you, right? They understood it. They saw it. Now, some of them accepted that, and some of them did not, and that we are going to have as well. Now, some people think that maybe we ought to go and we ought to study Aristotle more. And I had Old Testament theology with one of my favorite professors. And one of the points that my professor made in that class was that there is an element in our society that's saying that we need to go and study the ethics of Aristotle. And some are proposing for our society that we need to develop a model of ethics that Aristotle had pointed out. Now, Aristotle was a pretty interesting individual. Matter of fact, I remember a statement by Ayn Rand. She's another philosopher. Some of you have heard of her probably. And they asked her, who are the greatest philosophers in the world? And she said, the 3 A's. There was Aristotle, Aquinas. Now, Aquinas is interesting, Thomas Aquinas, because Aquinas is a religious guy, but he's really the one that said, okay, we need to forget about religion. We could pursue knowledge regardless of religion. But he was a Roman Catholic scholar. So she pointed out Aristotle, Aquinas, and the third one, Anne. That's her name, Anne. She didn't have any false modesty. But she was talking about Aristotle, and she made the statement that Aristotle was the greatest philosopher who had ever lived. No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. No, the greatest philosopher would be Jesus Christ. He's the greatest. You can see that he makes that statement really in Matthew 12:42 and Luke 11:31, where he compares himself to Solomon, the wisest that ever lived, right? And he said, there's one here greater than Solomon. He's speaking of himself. And I challenge people that would say things like, and this is sort of a popular theory that people say, we ought to pattern ourselves after Aristotle's teaching. And I'm like, okay, have you ever really studied everything Aristotle believed? Well, no. Well, you may want to do that before you start adopting that model. You see, here's the thing. Aristotle had some pretty strange beliefs. I mean, I know he's a Greco-Roman philosopher and all that, and he's a smart guy. I'm not trying to put him down or anything. I studied rhetoric in high school. He wrote that and learned a lot from his teachings. But the thing is, Aristotle is a man. He's a fallible man. When we base our ethics upon the teachings of Jesus Christ and the Bible, we're talking about something far more sublime than the teachings of some man. And we as Christians have got to stick to that and emphasize that with the people we talk to. Let me read you this statement. Some of you know that I've done some restoration history, and this statement is from Thomas Campbell. He wrote a work called the Declaration Address. It was published in 1809. It was sent to all the religious bodies in Washington. Now, it wasn't Washington, D.C. He was talking about Washington, Pennsylvania. And they sent this document to all these, every religious group they could find. And in this document, he makes this statement. Now, you might say, wait a minute, what are we talking about restoration history for? But I want you to think about this. This is a statement that he wrote. To prepare the way for a permanent scripture unity among Christians by calling up to their consideration fundamental truths, directing their attention to first principles, clearing the way before them by removing the stumbling blocks, the rubbish of the ages, which has been thrown upon it, and fencing it on each side, that in advancing toward the desired object, they may not miss the way through mistakes or inadvertency. By turning aside to the right hand or to the left is at least the sincere intention of the above propositions. You know what he's talking about there? He's talking about the same thing that Aquinas was sort of hinting at, but Aquinas didn't quite get it right. But you know what he's saying? He's saying, you know what? We need to get rid of all these traditions, all these superstitions, all these creeds, all these manuals, all these teachings of men. And we need to just get rid of that stuff. And we need to go back to the Bible, back to the scriptures. And Thomas Campbell is exactly correct. That's exactly what we need to do. I like it that he calls it the rubbish of the ages. That's sort of an interesting phrase. And I was sort of interested in that, and I told somebody, I'm going to research that phrase more, and I'm going to find where they said it in like the Millennial Harbinger and different books they wrote, debates they had and all that. And I think I'll write an article about that phrase, rubbish of the ages. That's the interesting thing. And I think if you find it, you let me know, but I think this is the only place they do that. I mean, they talk about it, the concept of it, but that phrase. Some of you who follow Greg Tidwell's writings, you may have read one of his recent ones about the fact that a lot of young men are interested in Catholicism. Why is that? Well, you may want to read that article. It was an excellent article. You should read it if you haven't. We have people in our assemblies that are saying that we ought to adopt more of what the Campbells would have said is rubbish. We argue about holidays. We talk about that. And I point out to them that their reasoning, their line of thinking, would not prohibit them from adopting the whole Roman calendar. The whole thing. All the saints that they had, there's nothing stopping them from doing that. And they don't seem to get it. I guess I have to do a better job of explaining it. You see, we are allegiant to God. We're allegiant to His Word. All these other things, they've been added, tacked on, what they are not His Word. And what happens is scientists come along and they'll go in this body of tacked on stuff or superstitions, and they'll say, aha, these things violate what we're seeing. And what they'll do, they'll throw the whole thing out. That's a mistake. That's a mistake. Now, when I was at Free Hardeman, I stayed in a dorm called Brigance Dorm, and that was named after L.L. Brigance. And L.L. Brigance, he taught restoration history at Free Hardeman. I never knew him. But he wrote for the Gospel Advocate in 1939, and he made this observation about what I just read to you. This is what he says. Since the close of the first century, the church had been drifting away from the original landmarks, notwithstanding its constant departure from the divine pattern, and had maintained a nominal unity with the Lutheran Reformation in the early part of the 16th century. That part that split off from the Roman Church began to divide and subdivide, and so continued unto this day. A great number and variety of Protestant denominations arose. Each one had its peculiar name, creed, doctrines, and practices. Attempts at reformation among them have been made from time to time, but without success. They revised their creeds at intervals, but never thought of abolishing them. Efforts to correct abuses in existing organizations were made occasionally, but the idea of abandoning such organizations, wiping the slate clean, going back to the beginning, and starting all over again seemed never to have occurred to them. Now, where I live in Newcomerstown, I got a huge Methodist church for a little village, a huge Methodist church, right? I can see it from my house. It's not like Sarah Palin saying she could see Alaska from her yard, but she probably could. You may want to check your map. But I mean, it's right there. It's huge Methodist church. And they're going through, in case you don't know, they were affiliated with the United Methodist Conference, the UMC Methodist Church. Well, what the UMC decided to do is they decided to embrace the homosexual lobby. And there are good people in the Methodist Church, that Methodist Church, and they said, we can't do that. So we're going to do what they call, we're going to de-affiliate. And since I know some of them at restaurants, and I talked to some of them, and they would lament, they said, they would say, how can they do something like that? I mean, the discipline forbids that. How could they do that? Well, they'll just rewrite that discipline. I mean, just rewrite it. I remember hearing about one man, he said he stayed up all night. I mean, this is a big heartache for him, and I'm not trying to make light of it. But I want you to think about it and use it to help him. He said, I stayed up all night leafing through my Bible, and I was astonished how many pages in the Bible I came across that forbid homosexuality. I couldn't believe it. They're going to have to change the discipline to do that. To which my reply to that is, why don't you just throw out the discipline and just follow the scriptures? I talked to another person, and they were talking about the thousands of dollars. This has to do with their organization. The thousands of dollars that little congregation had to pony up to buy out from the United Methodist Conference. They had to come up with thousands. It's their property, but they surrendered it in their arrangement. And now they're going to reaffiliate with what's called the Global Methodist Conference. And I remember when that was going on, that discussion, and every one of them I could talk to, I said, why are you repeating the same mistake? You don't need a conference. You don't need it. Now is the time to get rid of it. Just be governed by the scriptures. They looked at me as if I had a third eye. The thought had never occurred to them. Make it occur to them. Bring it up to them. Ask them. Say, well, why do you have this discipline book? Why don't you just follow the scriptures? We don't have a discipline book. We don't have an organization that tells the church at Newcomerstown what they can and cannot do other than the scriptures. That's not a difficult concept to understand, but you will be astonished, if you haven't already done this, you'll be astonished how some people, the thought has never occurred to them. They have not made that discovery in their mind. You see, the dawn of discovery, that's what I'm supposed to be talking about. Greg's here, I'm back on topic. We have to help them discover what we should already know. We have to help them reach their own dawn of discovery. Now, in one of the books that Greg recommended that I read, and I tried to read as much of it as I could, but it was called Ideas Have Consequences. I love that title. Ideas have consequences. But he makes this observation. He says, we think that as evolution occurs, everything gets better, and that includes our intelligence. I mean, we get smarter. Do we? Do we get smarter? I don't know about you, but I've been astonished by, I have an Amazon Fire Stick, and I watch some things like Peacock and different things. And I don't know if that mirrors regular cable TV or not. I don't know. But lately, I have been astonished by how many ads there are enticing people to gamble. Online gambling. And I'm like, are you out of your mind? Why would our government allow them to do that? Well, because our government's doing it. But don't worry. If you have an addiction problem, dial 1-800. Or what about the legalization of drugs? I mentioned I spoke about abortion a few years ago. Let me encourage you, if you think the battle over abortion ended with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, you are in for a wake-up call. It just moved the battle from Washington, D.C. to the states for now. And wickedness never rests. Evil never stops. They have moved abortion from a clinic you have to go to. Now you can just get it over the counter. Don't think that battle is over yet. And they legalized, well, they didn't exactly legalize it, but they decided that they weren't going to regulate hemp anymore. Hemp, H-E-M-P. Some of you know what that is. They're not going to. They want to be able to use it for clothing, for these. And I'm like, what? Cotton going is extinct now? I mean, what's the problem? We're going to have hemp now. Well, that's a durable cloth. I mean, really? I mean, that's your argument. Well, so they did that. But one of the things they did is within that action, you're allowed to use a certain percentage of a byproduct of that, which is like a hallucinogenic. And you're allowed to sell it because they legalized it. And we're fighting it in Newcomerstown. You're probably fighting it here. You may not know about it yet or whatever, but we actually had a young person come to high school that had some of that product, and they were using a vape pen to smoke it. And you go to the store, you know what he did? He got it from Amazon, shipped right to his house. Legal. Or you can get it in a drink form. Or you can go and get it in gummy bears if you want. We have a gas station in town that you go in there. I was in there one time. I was like, what is this, a head shop? There's like drug paraphernalia everywhere. Lottery tickets everywhere, beer and alcohol everywhere, gummies everywhere, vape pens everywhere. I'm like, what is this place? But don't worry. The government, they'll get their cut. And we'll put an 800 number on it. Are we all that much smarter? We need to think a little better. We have threats that need to be faced as a nation, but we also have threats to face as the Lord's people. Some see the remedy for these two, nation and church, as mutually exclusive. But that is short-sighted because God is the one who created what we call government. We as a society have messed things up, as we often do. But God has given us principles that we need to help others to see the dawn of discovery of transcendence of the divine. The Apostle Paul wrote to the church at Rome, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies as living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your reasonable or rational service. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. I'd like to encourage you, you're going to have a lot of great information in these lectures today. I would encourage you to open your Bible and read Romans 12, 1 and 2 throughout the day, and just think about it. There is a God. He created the world. He designed all these divine laws, all these natural laws that are so intricately intertwined that it doesn't matter the most powerful microscope that you can have to look at the smallest things. That when I was a child, they didn't even have names for the stuff. Or you can build the most powerful telescope and look. And you know what they're finding when they do that? They're finding things that naturalism cannot adequately explain. They are seeing transcendence. As Christians, we need to help them to see Christ in his word. Thank you very much.
Well, David, I appreciate always your diligence in preparation and your skill in bringing these thoughts to us in a way that is approachable. We've got a good start to our program this morning. We had a wonderful singing last night. We do have, as we're going forward, a couple of different options. One of them, for those who are interested in song leading, we have a song leading workshop that will begin at 9 o'clock downstairs, and we want to highlight that and it'll run through the morning. And then Brandon has a program, and if you'll explain what your group will be doing and then lead us in a dismissal prayer for this session. Thank you, Brandon.
Good morning. It is a lot of fun every year, at least the last 2 years. I've been tasked with doing kind of a creativity session. This includes lots of different aspects of church ministry, whether it's sermon preparation, graphics, websites, social media, how to use all of those things. And so we are having one here today. In fact, we will be leaving to go to campus. You get a tour of campus without getting out of the van, so you don't have to be cold. And a tour of campus, and then we'll be coming back over to one of our co-hatch areas where we will be gathering together, and we're going to be working specifically off of what your needs are. So if your needs and help of graphic design, or if it's media, or if it's church related, we're going to help you out. That's what we're going to work through, kind of just a live session. We've got a lot of little fun things planned. Also, lunch is on us, and so you get to come and have Chick-fil-A. I've got spot for just a few more. If you're wanting to come, we will be leaving right at 9:15, right outside. There will be a van. You can come and join us, and then we'll bring you back right around 3 o'clock. Hope you can come and join us for that. Let us pray as we close out. Father, we are grateful for this day. I'm grateful for this opportunity and for this lesson. God, guide us, give us wisdom, and give us strength in these days ahead that we may be the people that you've called us to be. God, we love you, and we look forward to the rest of this day. Be with us as we continue our study and as we continue to seek your will in all things. We ask all this through your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.